Hi, and welcome back to another one of Forward Camera's camera tutorials. Today we're going to be talking about a very good camera straight out of the late 70s, and it's kind of the twin of the Nikon FM. It's called the Nikon FE. Well, you might be asking, why is it called the Nikon FE? Well, it's because it's fully electric, meaning that it has an electronic shutter, and unlike the Nikon FM, which is fully manual mechanical, this one requires batteries to not only operate the light meter, but also all of the shutter speeds except for one particular shutter speed at 1/90th of a second, just in case you run out of batteries. This camera is very cool because not only does it have this really awesome vintage vibe to it, it's a rock solid camera, and all Nikon cameras, as you may or may not know, use the F-mount lens, and so even today's cameras use F-mount lenses, and so you could interchange pretty much all Nikon lenses and they work. So one particular feature that I like about this camera is that it not only does manual, meaning that you could change the aperture here and the shutter speed here, but you can also change this to auto, which means aperture priority. And for those of you who don't know what aperture priority means, it's when you set the aperture, the tiny hole through the lens over here, by adjusting this ring. This is how you set the aperture. And the camera's onboard light meter will tell the camera precisely what required shutter speed you would need to get the proper exposure for that aperture, making it very fast when you want to take photos at a certain depth of field. And for those of you who don't know what that means, well, when you change the aperture, it allows you to be able to have certain things in focus and other things in blurry when you have a larger aperture, say like 1.8 or 2.8. But when you go down to 16, most things stay in focus. But that just lets in less light. So it depends upon your lighting condition. But this allows you to work faster as a photographer. So how do we use this camera? The most easy way to use the camera is through the aperture priority. So you press this down over here, and then you could turn your shutter speeds, but we set it to auto first for those of us who want to use aperture priority. And then, depending upon your lighting, you set your aperture, and the camera will do the rest of the work. So you wind it to the next frame, and make sure that this winder turns the light meter and everything on by revealing this red little teeny area over here, if you can see it with my finger. That turns the electronics on in the camera. If that's not on, then it won't work. And you simply press the shutter, and you can hear it because the room is rather dark. It would make sense that with a very small aperture, such as 16, the camera is going to say, okay, I need a lot more time to make the proper exposure, so it will set the longer shutter speed to do so. If this was a brighter room, you might end up hearing it go faster. So perhaps if we set it to 1.8 in this room, it might go faster, and you can hear it. It went faster, meaning that the shutter speed is automatically set. Now, when you're using this camera, there are different ASA speed 35mm films that you can use in this. And it goes from 12 ASA or ISO all the way to about 3200. 3200 is if you're inside and in a dark environment, such as like T-Max. These are really fast films for darker environments, but usually I stay with like 100, 400 speed films for most outdoor situations because the grain is very low. So it's a lot better. But you would set your ASA depending upon your film speed, or ISO, whatever you want to call it. And how do you do that? Well, you first want to pop your film in, by the way. How do you do that? You press this little lever here, and then you pull up this film rewind. And you pop your film in here, and you take your film, 35mm film, and pull it around here and pop it into this hole and wind, okay? And then it should tighten. You close, you push this down, and you want to set your film speed. How do you set your film speed? Well, there's a knob here with different speeds, and you pull this outer ring outwards. I believe it's this outer ring. Oh no, it's this. You press this down, and you press this part down, and then you turn the wheel to whatever ASA you have. So I usually use about Tri-X 400, so I'm going to put it on 400. And then you notice over here, there's another ring for exposure, plus or minus exposure. So sometimes you want to overexpose, underexpose, or just have a perfect exposure. So I set this little red dot to 0 so that I have the perfect exposure. But that's up to you during your shooting. So now how do I use manual? Well, by the way, there's a little area inside that will, it has kind of a little arrow that goes up and down, and it tells you what shutter speed for aperture priority. But to use it as a manual camera, you just say if it goes up, it's gonna be not properly exposed. If it goes all the way too far down, it's not gonna be properly exposed. You want it in the middle to be properly exposed. So that's how you use this light meter. You press this down here to set your shutter speed. So you'll see it goes very fast at 1/1000th of a second. But then you have to hold this middle button down to move downwards. But as I go down, like 1/8 of a second, you'll hear it's very slow. Hear that? Or one second. And then there's an interesting feature of this camera. So this camera has M90, and that's manual, 1/90th of a second. What if you run out of batteries? Then you don't have a light meter, and you have to set things manually yourself. So that's a backup plan, 1/90th of a second. And B is bulb mode. So very long exposures at night of like cityscapes or like streaks of light of cars going down on the highway. And you hold the button as long as you want the lens to be open, and then you release. And you could put a little cable in here, and you can kind of press down, and that will allow you to hold it for however long you want your exposure. How do you change your lens? Good question. Well, like most Nikon cameras, there's a button over here. You hold it down, and then you rotate the lens. It's a little difficult to do backwards. Give me a second. You rotate the lens to the right, and the lens pops off. You keep that nice and clean. Any sort of F-mount lens. I like the manual lenses. It will take autofocus, but the autofocus lens will not autofocus with this camera. And so you can see inside there's a mirror and so on and so forth. And when you press down this right lever, you could stop down the aperture. This is the self timer. So let's just say you want to take a picture on a tripod with a bunch of friends and family. You would move this down, and then you would cock the shutter after. I'm gonna put it on the shutter speed so you can see it quickly. Cock the shutter, press it down, and then on the tripod you wait like a few seconds, get ready with your friends and family, and then the camera will take the photo after it clicks. See? This camera also takes flash. It has a flash hot shoe up here, very convenient. And one last thing, on the bottom, this is where you put the two 357 batteries. They're easy to get at the drugstore, so it's super convenient. It might drain batteries quickly because it does have an electronic shutter, so be ready to take more batteries. And then this over here is for the motor drive, so there's an accessory, so you don't have to constantly be winding it. It can automatically wind to the next frame. This is one of my personal favorite cameras because It's like the FM, but because it has the aperture priority, it makes things a lot faster. Plus, because it's electronic shutter, it's very accurate. The only thing I don't like about it is that it drains batteries quickly, and when I use my FM, I don't have to worry about the battery being drained, you know, because it's, except for the battery using just a light meter, it doesn't get drained as fast. But on this one, it uses the shutter uses the battery too, so you better be prepared to have extra batteries with the electronic shutters, but they're great. And when you want to rewind your film, you press this button down here, and then you hold that down, and then you go to the rewind knob up here, and then you rotate clockwise until you hear it click. It goes back into the 35mm canister, and then you can get it developed. This is a really great camera. I highly recommend it, and they're usually in my shop as well. So stay tuned for more videos from Forward Cameras. It's great to be back. It's been a while, and stay tuned. Please subscribe. Check out our Instagram at Forward Cameras. Check out our Twitter at Forward Cameras. And also on Facebook too, Forward Cameras. We also have an Etsy store, Forward Cameras, to check out our wide selection of vintage cameras such as this Nikon FE. Thank you for subscribing and watching, and take care.